Karoline Leavitt came prepared with a single sheet of paper, one question, and one goal: to speak the truth. What happened next was unexpected. Jimmy Kimmel lost his composure in front of millions, and the internet captured it all. Karoline wasn't naive. She knew stepping onto the set of a late-night talk show, especially this one, was like entering someone else's territory. Still, she accepted the invitation. The producer's email framed it as a chance to discuss the growing voice of young voters, and to her, that was worth showing up for. But something about the wording felt too polished, too controlled. She landed in Los Angeles late in the afternoon. A car met her at the airport and drove her straight to the studio near Hollywood Boulevard. The driver didn't say much, just played a curated Spotify playlist that oddly featured a lot of sarcasm-laced comedy tracks. Karoline stared out the window, wondering how much of the night had already been decided before she even agreed to show up. Backstage, things felt off. The hospitality was fine: bottled water, fruit plate, smiling interns. But the energy was strange. People smiled at her, but it wasn't warm. It felt like the kind of smile someone gives you when they think they already know how the story ends. One of the producers, a woman named Lacey, came in with a clipboard and fake cheer. "Karoline, thanks so much for being here. Jimmy's excited to talk to you. Just a heads up, we might throw in a few light jokes, but nothing too wild." Karoline smiled. "I can take a joke." Lacey smirked like she didn't believe that before she left. She added, "Oh, and no phones on stage." Okay, standard policy. That part hit differently. No phones. Karoline had been on enough shows to know that wasn't exactly standard, but she nodded anyway and slid her phone into her bag. Her makeup was done quickly and professionally, but without much conversation. No small talk, no "What brings you to LA?" Just a brush, some powder, and silence. The green room TV played muted clips of old monologues from the show. She watched Jimmy mock several politicians, mostly conservatives. She already knew what this was, but she also knew what she came here to do. A few minutes later, a young assistant with a headset knocked and waved her forward. "You're up in 5. She took a breath, straightened her blazer, adjusted her mic, and walked toward the stage entrance. She could hear the audience laughing from something Jimmy had just said, probably another jab at her expense. But she didn't flinch. As she waited behind the curtain, she caught a quick glimpse of Jimmy on the monitor. He was loose, relaxed, leaning into the crowd with that familiar smirk. And now he said, "Please welcome Karoline Leavitt, a former White House staffer, the youngest GOP congressional candidate in history, and someone who just might be able to tell us what the kids are thinking these days." Polite claps, a few giggles. She walked out, smile steady, shoulders back. Jimmy stood to greet her, offered a handshake, and as they sat down, he turned to the audience. "Karoline, thanks for being here. We had to bump our flat earth debate to fit you in, so no pressure." Laughter. Karoline smiled, unfazed. "Thanks for having me. I hear the flat earthers are more welcome in Hollywood anyway." That got a mixed reaction, a few laughs, some awkward coughs. She wasn't here to win the room. She was here to speak the truth. And even if no one else in that studio knew what was about to happen, she did. But something was brewing under the surface, and the next 5 minutes were about to change everything. The lights above were hotter than they looked on TV. Karoline could feel them baking into her skin, but her expression stayed cool. Her body leaned just slightly forward in her seat, not too eager, not too defensive. Jimmy, on the other hand, looked like he'd just hit a personal best at the gym. Loose tie, legs crossed, one arm flung over the back of his chair like he owned the whole building. "So, Karoline," he began, flipping casually through his blue note cards, "you've got a lot of opinions for someone who was still in high school when I had my first Emmy." That got a laugh from the crowd. It was an old trick: poke at age, position yourself as the seasoned voice in the room, and get the audience on your side early. Karoline didn't blink. "Well, Jimmy, I was still in high school when a lot of people made decisions that hurt my generation. I guess that gave me plenty of motivation to catch up fast." The audience paused, not sure if it was okay to laugh. Then someone clapped. Just one person. A moment later, the show moved on. Jimmy chuckled, shaking his head like he was playing along, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. He leaned forward. Seriously, though, people want to know what makes someone your age want to get into politics. Most folks your age are busy filming TikToks and drinking oat milk. Another easy laugh, a little louder this time. Karoline smiled, but her tone shifted. Because I don't want the people making decisions about my future to be the same people mocking it on late-night TV. There was weight in the silence that followed. The joke didn't land the way Jimmy wanted it to. He glanced toward the control booth, maybe waiting for a cue to redirect. He shuffled his cards, scanning for a safer question. Okay, fair. But surely you don't think these shows actually influence anything, right? We're just having fun here. Karoline tilted her head slightly. You don't think comedy shapes opinion? Jimmy shrugged. I think comedy makes people laugh. That's my job. She leaned in. Then why does so much of your material align with one political party's messaging? Why does your show only make fun of one side? The audience laughed again, but it was tighter this time, more uncertain. Jimmy's mouth opened, but before he could speak, Karoline continued. I actually brought something. She reached beneath her seat and lifted a folded sheet of paper. It was crisp, clean, highlighted in yellow across a few lines. Last October, you ran a segment about anti-science Republicans and quoted a line almost word for word from a strategic email sent out by a media coordination group based in D.C., paid by a PAC. Jimmy sat upright, not smiling now. Karoline held the paper between them. I have the memo. I can read it. Jimmy's voice dropped. You're saying I took a script from a political group? I'm saying someone on your team might have, and if you didn't know, you should have. The room wasn't laughing anymore. Jimmy tried to laugh it off, his voice a little higher than usual. Oh boy, I guess the kid's got her conspiracy board with the red yarn backstage, huh? A few giggles, but the tension was real now. Karoline didn't flinch. No yarn, just receipts. And with that, she placed the paper on the desk between them. The camera cut to Jimmy, but the usual sparkle was gone. His lips twitched into a half smile, but it didn't touch his eyes. You really think this is the place to do that? He asked, a little quieter now. Karoline's response was calm. Why not? You invited me here to talk about political awareness. I'm aware. And now your audience is too. But if Jimmy thought that was the end of it, he was about to find out how. Quickly the room could turn. Jimmy didn't touch the paper. He looked at it like it was something contagious, a prop from the wrong scene. The cameras were still rolling, and the room had gone from bright and jokey to stiff and electric. You could almost hear the crew holding their breath behind the lenses. Karoline leaned back in her chair, not smug, just steady. This wasn't performance, it was preparation. Jimmy reached for a mug of water that hadn't been touched. His hand trembled just enough for it to be noticed, and in that tiny gesture, something cracked. So what exactly are you accusing me of? He asked, trying to inject some levity but missing the mark. That I'm part of some deep state comedy cabal. She shook her head. Not a cabal, just a network of media people who all pretend they're independent while reading from the same political playbook. She looked to the audience, not the camera, not Jimmy, but the actual people sitting in those rows under the hot lights. Most of you probably came here tonight to laugh, right? But how many of you knew that Jimmy's October segment on anti-science hysteria was pitched by a media consultant hired by the Red River Initiative? That's a PAC funded by 3 political donors, who just last year also funded the exact ad campaigns your show pretended to make fun of. No one said anything. That name, Red River Initiative, wasn't a household one, but Karoline wasn't bluffing. Her folder had dates, names, email headers, and dollar amounts. Jimmy's jaw moved slightly like he was chewing on words he hadn't picked yet. He looked toward the control booth again. Can we? He mumbled, clearly off cue. But they didn't cut. At least not yet. Karoline didn't wait for permission. I'm not saying you wrote it, she continued, turning back to Jimmy. I'm saying someone in your building did. Someone got the language, got the spin and passed it along. And then it ended up in your monologue, dressed up as comedy. Jimmy shot back. Come on, you think I write every joke? No, she said, but you take credit for them, the audience murmured. A few people shifted in their seats. Even in Hollywood, even on a comedy set, something about this was sticking. Jimmy tried again, leaning forward now, visibly rattled. Karoline, with all due respect, this sounds a lot like the kind of thing people throw out to get attention. I don't take orders from DC strategists. I don't take orders from anyone. She paused, then, why are you so angry right now? That landed hard. The question didn't need an answer. It was the answer. Jimmy's jaw tightened. Because you're coming on my show accusing me of being a puppet. No, Karoline corrected. I'm pointing out that the puppeteers might be closer than you think. The crowd wasn't sure what to do. They'd come for jokes, not drama. But the longer this went on, the clearer it became. This wasn't scripted. Not by the network, not by Karoline, and definitely not by Kimmel. And that's when it happened. Jimmy slammed his hand on the desk, not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to silence the room. That's it, he said. We're done. He looked off stage and made a slashing gesture across his throat. Cut the segment. But Karoline, sitting still, asked one last question. If you really had nothing to hide, why not let me finish? The lights dimmed slightly as the crew began prepping for commercial, but it was too late. A handful of audience members had already pulled out their phones. No one cared about the no recording rule anymore. The raw footage was going to make it out, and by morning everyone would have seen exactly how it went down. But what spread next wasn't just a clip. It was a conversation. And it wasn't one Jimmy Kimmel would be able to control. By the time they came back from commercial, Jimmy's face was tight. No more casual jokes, no more crowd-warming banter, just a stony half-smile and forced composure. Karoline was still seated, still calm, still holding that folded paper with the highlighted lines. The studio had lost its bounce. It was dead quiet between laughs now, and the applause signs might as well have been invisible. Jimmy forced a chuckle as the camera returned to them. Well, that escalated, he said, looking out at the crowd. It was the kind of line designed to reset the mood, but no one laughed. Not really. A few claps, unsure. The audience wasn't with him anymore. They weren't against him either. They were just watching. He turned to Karoline. So, are we doing journalism now, or are you still pretending to be a politician? Karoline met his stare with the same composure she'd walked in with. Neither, she said. Just trying to tell the truth. I thought that used to be popular. Jimmy leaned forward. You walk in here, throw out a bunch of accusations, name-drop political groups no one's heard of, and you expect people to just go along with it. I expect people to think, she said, and I expect you, of all people, not to panic when someone brings facts to a conversation. He laughed, but it didn't sound natural. Facts? You think printing off some blog post from the internet makes you an expert? Karoline tapped the paper on his desk. This didn't come from a blog. It came from a leaked email thread. Your team was CC'd. That was it. Jimmy stood up. Actually stood. The chair squeaked as it slid back. I don't have to sit here and be accused of being a mouthpiece for the GOP's fever dreams, he snapped. His voice was no longer TV smooth. I invite you here to have a civil talk, and instead, I get a Gen Z Tucker Carlson who thinks yelling is the same thing as making a point. I haven't raised my voice once, Karoline said without moving. That's all you. Some of the crew began to shift nervously. One of the stage managers took a slow step forward but hesitated. It wasn't clear if this was still a segment or a breakdown. Jimmy looked like he might walk off, but that would mean letting Karoline have the last word, and that wasn't going to happen. He pointed at her, jabbing the air. You're not here to help anyone think. You're here to push a narrative. You came on this show to make headlines, not have a conversation. She nodded calmly. That's one way to look at it. Another way is that I came to have a real conversation, and you weren't ready for it. The audience was frozen. It didn't feel like TV anymore. It felt like a camera had wandered into something it wasn't supposed to catch, a peek behind the curtain that no one signed up for, but now no one could stop watching. Then Jimmy said it. "I'm not here to babysit some intern with a grudge against late night." It was cheap, personal, desperate. Karoline didn't respond right away. She looked down, gave a small laugh, then met his eyes again. "That right there," she said. "That's the problem. You think if someone's younger than you, they must be wrong. But the truth is, you're not scared of me. You're scared people might believe me." A murmur rippled across the room. Jimmy sat back down, eyes fixed on the desk, tapping his fingers. His producers didn't signal anything. The director didn't cut. It was just dead air for a few seconds, something that never happens in live TV. Then Karoline stood. "I think we're done here," she said. "I said what I came to say." She turned, stepped off the stage, and walked past the curtain. No handler, no security, just her. And the audience, silent now, watched her go. But while Jimmy sat stunned in his own studio, a different show was already starting online, and this time, he wasn't the one hosting it. The first clip hit Twitter before Karoline's shoes touched the pavement outside the studio. Shot from the third row with shaky hands, it caught the exact moment Jimmy stood up and barked that she was pushing GOP fever dreams. Within minutes, the hashtag #Kimmel Meltdown started trending in Los Angeles. An hour later, it was trending nationwide. At first, the posts were split. Hardcore Kimmel fans claimed she was planting conspiracies, but the full segment started to leak, and with it came context. Karoline's calm tone, the way Jimmy cut her off, the paper she placed on the desk caught clearly in a high-res screen grab by someone in the front row. People paused, rewatched, questioned. A YouTube video popped up just past midnight. It was a split screen, Karoline on one side, Jimmy on the other, in slow motion. Viewers could see the exact moment his demeanor changed. The comments were ruthless. "She was prepared. He lost control. I don't care where you stand politically, this wasn't a good look for Jimmy." By morning, the clip had been watched over 2 million times. Even people who had never heard of Karoline before the interview now knew her name. Some praised her for exposing the media's bias. Others respected her restraint. And then something unexpected happened. A former Kimmel staff writer, someone no longer affiliated with the show, posted a thread. She didn't confirm the memo directly, but she hinted that segments often came from sources far outside the writer's room, and that nobody asked too many questions if the material was good and timely. That was all the internet needed. Other former employees chimed in, some defending Jimmy, others staying vague. The speculation deepened, and news outlets picked it up. Some tried to downplay it, calling the memo unverified. Others admitted, the show may have received influence from groups with political agendas. Karoline stayed quiet for most of the day. No tweets, no press statements. That, more than anything, added fuel to the fire. She didn't need to say anything. The footage was speaking for itself. Then, at 4:03 p.m., she posted a single sentence on X: "Truth doesn't panic." Nothing else. No hashtags. No finger pointing. It was retweeted 75,000 times in 2 hours. Meanwhile, Kimmel's team scrambled. There was no official apology, just a bland statement from the network that late-night programming is entertainment first, and that editorial independence is central to its creative freedom. But it wasn't enough. Clips from past episodes resurfaced, monologues that, when viewed again, seemed suspiciously close to press releases from activist groups. People started drawing lines, not just between Jimmy and the Red River Initiative, but between late-night shows in general and broader political machinery. And the question kept repeating, how much of what we laugh at is actually propaganda wearing a smile? Karoline began getting requests from shows that wouldn't have touched her a week ago. Podcasts, radio stations, even a few liberal-leaning outlets. People weren't suddenly switching sides, but they were curious, intrigued by the way she stayed collected while a veteran host unraveled. The divide wasn't clean anymore. It wasn't about left or right. It was about authenticity, about power, about who gets to shape the conversation and what happens when someone unexpected wrestles the mic away. At a cafe in Tempe, a college student streamed the clip on her laptop, watching Karoline's interview between classes. In a diner outside Wichita Falls, two retired men debated whether comedy had become just another arm of campaign strategy. And, somewhere in Santa Rosa, a public school teacher showed her civics class The Exchange, not as a gotcha moment, but as a conversation starter. But this story wasn't just about Karoline anymore. It was about how quickly trust can crack and how fast the truth can spread when someone refuses to sit down. The next episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live aired without mentioning the incident. No jokes, no clarification, no nod to what had dominated headlines for the last 48 hours. Jimmy came out smiling, delivered a light monologue about weather apps and celebrity divorces, and carried on as if nothing had happened. But people noticed. Clips of the awkward silence where his usual political jabs should have been began circulating almost as fast as the original meltdown. Commenters weren't kind. You don't get to scream on live TV, then pretend it didn't happen. If it was all nonsense, why not say so? We saw it. You can't erase it. Behind the scenes, things weren't smooth either. Network executives held emergency meetings. Ratings dipped slightly, but more concerning was the drop in audience trust. Sponsors started asking quiet questions, not about Karoline, about credibility. Karoline, meanwhile, was selective about how she used the momentum. She declined major interviews except one. She sat down for a long-form podcast with a journalist out of Des Moines, a smaller outlet, no flashy production, just a deep conversation for nearly an hour. She didn't rehash the incident. She talked about being underestimated, about why she chose to speak up on national television, about the importance of knowing who shapes the information people laugh at, trust, and absorb without question. You don't have to agree with me, she said, but you deserve to know when someone's selling you an opinion dressed up as entertainment. The clip of that line went viral too. It wasn't fiery, it wasn't dramatic, it was clear, and people respected that. By the end of the week, late-night comedy shows across the board were being examined. Viewers began noticing patterns, recycled, jokes across networks, shared language, even similar timing in what stories they covered and ignored. The story Karoline brought to light wasn't just about Jimmy, it was about an entire culture. She never claimed to be a hero, never said she exposed anything. She just showed up prepared and refused to back down when the temperature rose. That left a mark in classrooms, online forums, even in a few editorial meetings across the country. People began to ask a very old question in a new way. Who decides what's funny, and why does it always seem to favor one point of view? It wasn't that people suddenly turned off their TVs or stopped laughing. They just started paying closer attention. And in a time when so much of what we hear feels pre-approved and neatly packaged, that awareness, no matter where you fall politically, is a step towards something better. Karoline's message wasn't about taking sides. It was about refusing to let anyone, comedian, politician, or executive, speak for you without your permission. That's the kind of conversation that sticks. And maybe that's why, despite all the noise, the algorithms, and the desperate attempts to distract, a calm voice in the middle of chaos still cuts through louder than any scripted punchline. If this story made you think, even just for a moment, share it. Tell someone. Ask the hard questions. And the next time you hear something that feels polished but not personal, look a little closer. The truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits for someone willing to speak calmly and not look away.